What's up, Giants fans? Welcome to an emergency podcast episode of Giants Talk. I'm Cole Kuiper here with Giants insider Alex Pavlovic. The Giants have announced they're parting ways with manager Bob Melvin after a disappointing 2025 season. We're going to talk about that, what happened, what it means, and potential future skippers for this ball club on this very special episode of Giants Talk. Before we get started, Giants Talk is presented by Mancini's Sleep World. At Mancini's Sleep World, every mattress is backed by our Rest Easy promise of a 365-night comfort guarantee with the lowest prices and next-day delivery. Visit sleepworld.com. Alex, their mattress experts will guide you with a personalized shopping experience to find your perfect mattress. Whether it be pressure relief, cooling comfort, or better back support, Rest Easy, we got you covered.
We're no longer resting in October, so
no
managerial search.
The search began early. The Giants moved fast, and will save rest for later in this offseason. Giants Talk is also presented by UCSF Health, all-star care for every fan. UCSF Health is the official healthcare partner of the San Francisco Giants. Okay, Alex, let's dive right into it. Giants waste absolutely no time. Less than 24 hours after the season ends, here we are with what could be the biggest move of the offseason.
It will be the biggest move of the offseason. I mean, this is the second time in 3 years they are looking for a new manager. This is the third straight. Buster took the job right away, so there wasn't a president of baseball operations search. But third straight year, somebody has been fired at the end of a mediocre season. This one, you could see the other two coming a mile away. This one, I think we saw coming over the last week, and especially over the weekend when Bob did not really have much contact with the front office. Mm-hmm. He had the support of his players, but not the front office. He ends up taking the fall for this. I will say, first of all, I mean, this is different because this was not literally to the end after Sunday's game. I am having players come up to me to chat about this, and they had his back. I think they knew something was coming, but they had his back. This was not Gabe Kapler. This was not Farhan Zaidi, where they both lost the clubhouse, which is important. I don't think Bob ever lost the clubhouse. He lost a lot of games in July and August. And I think those home games in particular, those hurt, losing 15 of 16 at home, 0-6 before the trade deadline. A lot of that goes on the players as well and on, I think, the coaching staff. But ultimately, someone takes the fall. And ultimately, I think Buster's going to get one chance, hopefully, one chance to hire a manager. And one thing we've seen with Buster, and I don't think he's blameless in this season by any means, but one thing we've seen with him is there is a sense of urgency, and he's not going to sit around and wait to see what happens next year. He did say that today. He met with reporters on Zoom and said, I don't believe you can just come back and try the same thing next year and hope it goes better. So there's a sense of urgency with him. He wants to get back to the postseason, desperately wants to do it next year. And, the fact that they paid a few $1 million on July 1st to pick up Bob's option didn't ultimately matter. I think the good thing is it's good when you realize that you think you made a mistake. It's not great when you make that mistake. So that was a move that we talked about at the time was clearly meant to boost morale. Buster said that today. He was hoping that would jolt the Giants in July. They'd lost like 6 or 7 at the time. Didn't happen. So it ends up being a costly decision they made in July, but now he'll get to go and pick a hand-picked manager and find someone who can try to lead this team that really has the core in place. Logan Webb, Matt Chapman, Willie Damas, Rafi Devers, Bryce Eldridge, Robbie Ray for next year. They have their guys for next year for the most part. And to your point about this being the biggest move, yeah, they need to rebuild the pitching staff, but the most important thing they do this offseason will be hiring a manager. And that guy, I think, in concert with Buster and Zach Manassian and Jeremy Shelley and the rest of the front office, hiring a coaching staff that they think is better than this one.
Yeah, and we'll get to starting to spitball who the different options for managerial position are as they start to have those discussions later in this episode. But you mentioned some of the players, and we'd heard a lot in the content farms and the clickbait titles about how various quotes were inferring that Melvin had lost the clubhouse and various, seeing the actual videos and hearing what the players had to say about their manager felt so incongruous with what I guess some of the narratives were. And I'm really curious about guys like Matt Chapman, who has openly said he has a history of Bob Melvin from their time with the A's. And he has said Melvin was a big part of the reason that Chapman signed long term with the Giants. Logan Webb seems to adore him. So this does seem like I don't know, it will impact the players in some way.
It will. I think we saw Matt after Sunday's game. I mean, there was an understanding, and that was when I really felt this was happening. I mean, I've had this sense for the past week. Talked to a lot of people. They really didn't. Clubhouse did not know on Sunday what the final decision would be here. There was a sense of what was coming from everybody. But Matt, you could tell was his tone had changed a little bit, and it was, I love Bob Melvin. Been with him for a long time. He just said over and over again, I love Bob. But I think Matt understands too that this is Buster's choice, and Matt wants to be in the postseason. He stood on the field a year ago and said we're going to be in the postseason. It did not happen. He wants to play playoff games in San Francisco. I will say, you mentioned all the people. Social media is a different animal, obviously, but I'm genuinely telling you this. He did not lose the clubhouse. I talked to players on the record, off the record, key guys in there, smaller guys in there. He didn't lose the clubhouse. That was not what happened here. He just wasn't, I think the main thing here is he was not able to, for whatever reason, and nobody was really, turn this around in July when they needed to win like one game on that homestand against the Mets and Pirates to go get starting pitching instead of trading Rogers and Doval. And really, I think the other big one was in August when they lose 15 out of 16 at home. The fact that they couldn't just stop the bleeding there, I think that really impacted the front office. And I think a lot changed in August and a lot changed in July on that final homestand. There was a lot of disappointment on deadline day that's where this went. And he just never kind of was able to turn the bus around or slam on the brakes and just put an end to this. And I think Bob was at a loss for words at times too. And I don't think it helped him that down the stretch, a lot of his answers were, it is what it is. I think he didn't have answers to what happened here. And when you are the president of baseball operations, and you ask your manager what happened, that's tough because he couldn't find a way to turn this around. And Buster's looking at this for next year going, well, what if this happens again next July? Like, how do you work your way out of this? And not to bring up a guy that, everyone's going to think about what if Stephen Vogt had been hired 2 years ago, right? But he found a way to, and this isn't fair to Bob, but Stephen found a way to turn that Guardian situation around this year and have a historic comeback and win the AL Central. And I think Buster experienced this with Bruce Bochy, and just that to me is the biggest thing that stands out. Just I think Bob's a good man. I think he is. I feel for him in a lot of ways because he hoped this would be his final job. So a Bay Area guy, Palo Alto guy, played for the Giants. Grew up adoring Willie McCovey and Willie Mays, but I think he will pay for not being able to just kind of stop the bleeding in the middle of the summer.
Well,
and has
there's kind of like dual battling narratives here of like, were expectations too high? What was he going to do with this team that heading into the season was expected by most national outlets to be a roughly 500 team? And then how close it came to playoffs being an option, division actually being a distant option, and how bad the losing streaks were when the Giants weren't hitting. What I guess were the expectations for a manager like Bob Melvin this year, and what could he have done differently if the Giants win 2 more games, sneak their way into the playoffs, 3 more games, sneak their way into the playoffs over the Reds? Is Bob hanging around another year?
I think so. I don't think you fire a manager who makes the postseason.
Yeah.
What did we predict at the beginning of the year? I think we were both around like 84, 85 that we thought this. The problem is you going at Rafi Devers, and you're 11 games over 500, I believe, when you do that. Mm-hmm. You briefly slide into first place in the National League West, and 2 days later, Buster goes and gets Devers. And the record with Devers was like, it was bad. I don't know the exact numbers here. It was like 10 under 500 or something like that. So that is a problem. I think the other thing, and I know this personally disappointed Bob, is I asked him at the end of the year, I said, what if I had told you in March that you would get all-star seasons out of Webb and Ray and get almost 30 starts out of Verlander? And he kind of goes, I feel like I'm in great shape.
Yeah.
So that the expectations change over the course of the year because of some of that. Now, to be fair to Bob as well, the 0-6 homestand doesn't completely fall on him. And his boss then went and traded his two key relievers, including his most important reliever in Tyler Rogers. And you look at it, and we've talked about this a lot, one of the great disappointments of the season is they end up doing that. And in August and September, if they had Rogers and Duvall in their bullpen, they might make the playoffs. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of blame to go around, but yeah, I just go back to July and not being able to figure this out.
Taking a quick look back on Bob Melvin's Giants career, he ended 161 and 163, just below 500, this season being the season that ended directly on 500. No playoff appearances, 9 ejections. When his signing was first announced, I think I was mostly wrapped up in just, the fairy tale element. This is, like you mentioned, this was his dream job. He's a Bay Area guy too. Yeah. He's from the Bay Area, went to college in the Bay Area. He played professional baseball in the Bay Area. It just seemed so perfectly written for him to have a storybook ending here in San Francisco and tie that all together. So now I don't know what happens. There's no storybook option next for the Giants.
Well, should we do 2 minutes? No, we'll save the Bruce Bochy 2 minutes for later in the podcast, make people listen longer. Yeah, I don't think there should be a storybook option, honestly. Yeah. Like, I think part of the mistake 2 years ago was I think they tried the storybook option. And they tried, and Farhan ends up costing himself because and a lot of this is out of his hands, but they did something completely different with Gabe Kapler and that staff, something we've never seen here before and really haven't seen in Major League Baseball before, with the size of that staff, with how they went about their business, with how they viewed the game. It really worked one year. It didn't work after that. And I think the mistake here was saying, let us go get the complete opposite guy here. And not just the complete opposite guy, the complete opposite coaching staff, because Bob came with Matt Williams, who obviously is a forever Giant. He came with Ryan Christensen, who has been with him for a long time. He ends up hiring some of his own people who are just the complete opposite of what Gabe had. And I think that was part of the mistake here. And one thing I heard on Sunday from somebody who was hopeful Bob would be back, told me, he's like, his coaches did him no favors here, because I don't think the whole group had a great year. And I think most, if not all of those guys will be gone now. So that was part of the issue here for Bob, I think, was they tried to do the storybook thing. And I just don't think that's the right way in 2025. I mean, that the game is played differently. We have seen the only successful season in the last decade here was played differently. Yeah. There's still a lot to, like, pitching and defense wins at Oracle Park. Yes. But one thing Buster said today, and I will get back to this every time we talk about the coaching search. It was kind of the main thing that I took away from it. He said his main goal is to find someone who is obsessive about the details, obsessive about work, and getting the most out of our players and our staff. And right away, I thought, that's Gabe Kapler. And that is Gabe Kapler's staff. That is Donnie Ecker. That is Kai Correa. That is Craig Albernez, Justin Veely, Alyssa Nakin. That is that staff. So I think one of the issues here, and I'm glad you brought up the word storybook, is they tried to do that. And they tried to be like, let's do the Forever Giant thing, and maybe this will work. It didn't work, and I don't know that will work in 2025. And I think there was probably a middle ground here where either it's somebody else or it's Bob with more of a forward-facing analytics view on things. Look, they've been very open over the last year about, like, we moved the analytics people out of the clubhouse. We're not into that anymore. That's a mistake in 2025. So, yeah, I think they tried something totally different, and you nailed it there. They tried to do the Forever Giant. He's played here. He knows everybody. This will end well, and it just didn't work.
I mean, maybe I'm selling Bob Melvin short. This is a 3-time Manager of the Year winner. But like you mentioned, 2021 was the only time it's gone right for the Giants. And even more so than it being played differently on the field, it was coached so wildly differently. Yeah. So when we start to run down the list of options for who could fill this seat, that's going to be a big part of it, is who can balance that old school, new school, Buster Posey, obviously an old school guy. I don't know that we'd go fully the like how it looked in 2021 route, but what can get close to that? So that it's going to be fascinating. But before we get to that, just like farewell, Bob. What do you think is next for him? I mean, he has managed half of the teams here on the West Coast. He could complete the tour. There's multiple teams with openings or potential openings here on the West Coast. He's done the Mariners, D-backs, A's, Padres, and now Giants. Or do we think this is more of like I'm shifting to a bench coach role or even getting out of it entirely?
He is 63 years old. He had hoped, and he has said, he has told me he was hopeful this was his final job. He anticipated this being his final job. Now he leaves with a bitter taste in his mouth. I don't know that 63 it's up there. It's not too far up there. We've seen Bruce Bochy's older than he is. He came back. This is going to be a difficult one, I think, for him because he had a really talented team in San Diego and couldn't come through, and they let him go up the coast in the division, and he had a less talented team here, but couldn't get him to the postseason. You mentioned he's had a lot of stops in the big leagues. Look, at some point, those guys still kind of circle around. Like there's always that team that is like, you know what, we feel like, and ironically, the Giants are actually in this spot right now. We feel like we're pretty close. Can we get a guy who's kind of the adult in the room? This is what the Giants thought they were doing 2 years ago, and really solidify things. So I wouldn't be shocked if we see him again. At the same time, he's been around a lot, and this is a tough way for the final two spots to end. I will say I always enjoyed working with him. I think he was very professional with us. I think he was very honest with us, and that is something I appreciate as a journalist. There was a lot of times where you'd wonder about something. He was always honest. You'd wonder about something. Why didn't Randy pitch last night? Why did so-and-so pitch the seventh inning? Why is this? I'll go even to the end where everyone's looking at Sunday's lineup and going like, why is Wilmer Flores in there again? And he kind of said before the game, he said, there's a plan here. And he did. I think he did a nice job with Wilmer and with Willie Adames and Logan Webb and getting those guys their moments on Sunday. So I like Bob. I think he's had a very successful career in the big leagues. I hope he gets another shot somewhere just because I still think the fact that he held that room together for 2 years is important. There's a lot that goes into this now. And I think he probably could use some different voices around him if he gets another opportunity, and we'll see if he does.
All right. With that, let's start talking what the Giants should look for in his successor, who the Giants could look for in his successor, and maybe even take a peek at the coaches who could stay, who could go, and what that could look like. Before we get into that, though, Giants Talk is presented by Mancini Sleep World. At Mancini Sleep World, every mattress is backed by our Rest Easy promise of a 365-night comfort guarantee with the lowest prices and next-day delivery. Visit sleepworld.com. All right, Alex, we've already touched on it, but just to recap, the Giants would be looking for a guy who can balance old school and new school, embrace analytics without losing that kind of like Buster Posey mentality. What else? They've had a lot of success and now lack of success with catchers leading the organization. That seems to be the de facto option for the Giants.
This is going to be a weird first thing to say. I think they need someone who's really likable. I think they, we hear from the angriest people
We do.
constantly, but I do think they need someone who can connect maybe a little bit more with the fan base. Gabe never really did. I think Bob never fully did either. I think
we are going to have this discussion, and the answer is going to be Stephen Vogt across the board.
yes, I think that. But I watched Vogt's post game yesterday, celebrating in Cleveland's clubhouse, and you see a lot of just like the passion and the fact that that guy becomes an icon for that fan base. Bruce Bochy connected with his fan base. It didn't happen right away, but he did, and I think a lot of his coaches did as well. I think that is something that they need here to connect not just with the players but with the fan base as well. Now attendance was way up this year, so in a lot of ways they're headed in the right direction. Obviously the fan base came around on Willie Adames and some of these other guys. They love Logan, Matt Chapman. I think that's important. But really, I do think I'll go back to what Buster said about, and this is not an anti-work ethic thing for this current staff. I think in this day and age, he said the word obsessive. Like, you have to be obsessed. Gabe's coaches were living in hotels, like, because they were living in hotels because they were at the ballpark at 10 in the morning. That is the kind of work that goes into this job right now.
Didn't we talk to Kai Correa about how he was watching game footage in the shower every morning because he couldn't step out from the job for that long?
Kai learned the rule book by putting it on tape. Like, he would watch. Yes, he would watch things, put a little thing along his shower, and maybe that's too extreme as well. But I do think this is a job that is all encompassing now. It is a CEO job, but it's a lot of hours. And I'm not saying Bob didn't put those hours in, but part of this comes with your staff, and so I do think that's going to be important. I think we can dive into some names here and who we think. There's going to be some very obvious candidates, I think, and some other ones. But also generally, sometimes the best guys are surprises. And Buster did say he has some guys in mind. He's obviously given this a lot of thought. He's played with a lot of guys who are now in the managerial mix. He's played for two very different managers. So I think he's going to have an interesting perspective here. The last thing I would say too is you hope this is not 2 years or 3 years. And you hope this is someone who not only grows with Buster, who is still a very young lead executive. Zach Manassian is a young GM, a team that is locked in here for basically all the core pieces for the next next decade. So that is the other thing I would say is you don't want to be doing this again in 2 years. And I know some people we'll get to Bochy, like the Bochy and bring a manager in waiting. Like, no, go get your manager. Go get your guy who's going to manage the rest of Logan Webb's career and is going to manage the rest of Rafi Devers' contract here and is going to be here as long as Buster's in charge.
That is exactly what I was going to say is they need to look for a long-term figurehead for this team, not we're going to read countless Bochy articles and talk pieces, and every social media piece is going to be Bochy. So let's just start with that on the list.
I pause just to write my Bochy art, just get some clickbait Bochy stuff out there.
Get your article up before I start ripping the concept.
Yeah. Go for it.
Yeah, no, it's just like, it's such low-hanging fruit. I think it's pretty clear if Bruce Bochy wanted to be a major league manager, he would be in Texas right now. He has had great success over there, won a World Series there, just like he won trophies over here. He is done with his tenure of the Texas Rangers, but I do not think Bruce Bochy is a fit for this, both because I don't know that he would want to do it and because they need someone, like you said, who can grow with Buster Posey, who can grow with this team and kind of forge his own path. If you're Bochy, what? It's just risking tainting your legacy here in San Francisco?
Are you breaking news? His tenure's, I saw you checking your phone. So, it's going to come up. It goes back to your thing about storybook. Like, that's not what they need here. They need to figure this out. And this goes back to the losing goes back to 2017. And guess who the manager was? So this is, I think, Buster experienced making the postseason under Gabe Kapler. He obviously had some incredible highs with Bruce Bochy. He also saw the last 3 years with Bruce Bochy that were rough. And so he knows this better than probably anybody in the world. It would be a hell of a story. And I think Boch can still do it. I mean, we saw a couple years ago, 3 years ago when he came back, like, I think he can still be a motivator of men and he can still pull the right buttons in the postseason. I just don't think it's, to your point, like, there's a real risk there legacy wise for him if you do want to do that. And it's a real risk for Buster too. Like, you're going to put your entire tenure as baseball operations basically on trying to run it back and live the good times again and bring in a 70-year-old manager and just say, this worked in 2012, 14, 2010. That was a long time ago, man. That was a long time ago. So I think there's a lot of risk for that. I know there's a huge part of the fan base that I think would just like go nuts. But for me, this is like, again, I do think they were like headed in the right direction at times under Kapler's staff, and they were doing things that they did a lot of things that were bad. I think they were doing a lot of things that were right. And somebody who can mix everything together here is the right fit for me.
I'm going to throw a second name in. That's another not going to happen. We're not doing the storybook thing, but I've seen Dusty Baker thrown around. He is in the Giants organization as a special advisor to baseball operations. He's 76 years old, obviously a long history with the Giants. Not going to be a fit.
I don't think so. If you're going to do the nostalgia thing, like really probably the only guy I would, first of all, if you're doing like Javi Lopez, Hunter Pence, Brandon Crawford, stop. Just, this is not the time for that. I think a first-time manager is fine, but not someone just stepping off. A lot of these guys, for other reasons, like would never do this. But yeah, Buster Posey, not going to do both jobs. So cross all those names, not off of your list personally, off of listeners' list that they're making. Dusty, I don't think is the only nostalgia pick that I would be even somewhat interested in. And I'm obviously biased here because I work with him on TV is Ron Wotus, who I think still has the energy and has never gotten that shot. That would be the only nostalgia pick that I do think there's an accountability that he brings to everything he does. But again, I just don't think that's where Buster's going to head with this.
Yeah. All right. Coming down my list, Mark DeRosa is a name I've seen thrown around a lot. I think his only managerial experience is in the World Baseball Classic, managing Team America. He is a former Giant, currently TV analyst. What do we think about DeRosa?
If I had to handicap this right now, and if you ask me, this is completely like literally have not talked to Buster about this. Have not talked to anybody in the front office about this. If you ask me, who do you think checks all the boxes right now? I think I would pick Mark DeRosa. I think he's been around the game a long time. I know he does TV now, but he gets an exposure to different things there. He wants to manage. He's waiting for the right job. He was a Giant. It wasn't like a memorable tenure here, but he knows Buster. I think he checks a lot of the boxes. So he's a really interesting name to me. I would expect him to be, and again, not reporting this, it makes a ton of sense. I would expect him to be in the mix, and doesn't have the experience, but you put a good staff around you. So, and I think DeRosa is, from a charismatic standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, I know him a little bit. I think he could bring a lot of that as well.
I mean, as a TV personality, you talked about someone who we want to ingratiate himself to the fan base. That is a charismatic man who I think would be great for that exact purpose here. What about Skip Schumacher, currently with the Rangers, manager of the year 2 years ago? I believe was he under Kapler in Miami, or did that overlap not happen?
He is. Gabe might have fired him. No, that front office, I'm not sure. But he is the manager in waiting in Texas. So I think we have to see how that shakes out.
Okay.
If he is not the manager next season for the Rangers, he is kind of the top guy, I think, out there in terms of managerial candidates this offseason, just in MLB in general. Yeah. So I've talked to some scouts the last few weeks. He's viewed as the main guy. Donnie Eckler was in Texas. He's interesting. He wants to manage. Buster knows him from 2021. He did a nice job helping Buster as a hitting coach. Now he just got fired in Texas, but he would be interesting. And when you talk about obsessive, like he is the definition of obsessive. I'll run through. I know you had a list here. I'll run through some of the other names that I came up with. Mark Hallberg, I think we're going to talk about. Just Mark's very highly thought of. He knows Buster from Florida State, played with Buster. I think Mark's going to be a good manager one day. They unfortunately haven't given him, they've given him more responsibility. Unfortunately, like he never had a chance to be like a bench coach yet or anything like that. I think had he been Bob Melvin's bench coach, he would be kind of an obvious front runner. He still might be, but he's someone we'll talk about. Craig Albernez, I think is fascinating. He's a future manager as well. He was on this staff. He did a nice job with Patrick Bailey when he was coming up. Those two are very close. He worked with Buster as a catching coordinator, obviously, and he's in Cleveland with our guy Stephen Vogt. So he has kind of learned a lot of different things. I think Craig he's going to be a great leader one day as well. He's going to be a manager one day. So he could be an option here. Who else are on our short list here? Yeah, Schumacher. And then, here's the name I think everyone's going to be talking about, and this is going to be up to whether he wants to interview. But Nick Hundley was at the Willie Mack ceremony on Friday night.
He was.
Nick is a future something. I think he has been a little hesitant to jump into certain things over the last few years. But if Nick wants to manage down the line, Nick will manage. If Nick wants to be high up in baseball operations somewhere, he will do that as well. So I think he has a bright future. I'm not sure exactly what his family situation is, and if that maybe there's young kids holding him back from jumping into some of these things. I believe he didn't want to talk about this job a couple years ago. Might be having that right here, but Nick backed up Buster. He would be a very popular hire, I think, and this is a weird, but there's a brightness to Nick. Like he always has a smile on his face. He seems like the kind of guy who will not allow you to lose 15 of 16 home games. So find a way out of that. That's maybe projecting, but yeah, I just think there's a different, he would bring a different attitude to this organization. And if he wants to interview, I think he will get an interview, and I think he would be a good choice as well.
All right.
Who else are you seeing on the internet?
That's a pretty solid list. I mean, the one I keep seeing that's obviously a joke is Buster was the owner. Then he put himself in as president of baseball operations. Can he take a third hat as manager? Do you like the Greg Popovich thing? But I think the one thing we're missing from our list, and I don't know if that's just a blind spot on my side or the candidates aren't out there, is maybe a manager with more Spanish-speaking experience. The Giants have a lot of Latin players right now, making up a big part of that core that's locked down for the next 5 years. That would be an important element of their future manager to potentially lean into.
Yeah, not to keep coming back to Gabe, but I mean, he made a point of making sure he had Spanish-speaking coaches on his staff and guys who could connect. Now, it didn't always work with Camilo Duvall, but he made a point of that. I think Buster's going to take a wide lens here. And look, there are going to be people we don't know about. I'll go back to when they were searching for Bochy's replacement, and you hear names like Joe Espada and Matt Quatraro, and there's bench coaches elsewhere that I'm sure Buster has been asking questions about. There's going to be guys who have maybe got a shot a few years ago, and maybe he played against one of their teams or got to know him in some way and liked him. But I do think one thing he said is it's not like automatic that this doesn't have to be a former Buster Posey coach or a teammate. We're making those connections with some of these guys because it does make it easier to get into the room, I think. If you're an Albernez, if you're a Hallberg, if you're a Donnie Eckers type, Nick Hundley, but it doesn't have to be one of those guys. And it could be someone totally off the board. One interesting thing about this search is I think Farhan was very narrow in what he could do 2 years ago. And it kind of felt at the time it had to be Melvin or Vogt. Like it had to be one of those two guys. I think Buster can do whatever here. Like he could, if he wants to bring Bruce Bochy back, he has the pull to do that and say, this is what I feel is the right move. If he wants to get someone who if he wants to pull Kurt Casale out of wherever he is and say, this is my guy, like he could, it would be, this is his move. This is, again, I think you get one shot generally to make this big move. And that's why I think he's taking the shot. But yeah, I think that's going to be a big part of this is he gets a crack to really kind of aim high and not just aim for 83 wins, aim for someone who he feels can get this group to a World Series.
Well, obviously a big part of whoever is selected's success is going to be who they surround themselves with. I don't think the decisions have been made yet on the current Giants coaching staff, but you have to imagine whoever the new manager is going to bring new faces along with them. Bob Melvin surrounded himself with Pat Burrell, Mark Hallberg, Matt Williams, JP Martinez, Ryan Christensen, Garvin Alston. How many do you see staying around?
JP, by the way, might be someone who gets an interview.
I
think he wants to manage down the line. So I thought JP did a great job. I know Garvin's very popular. I think we are going to see mostly cleaning house. And honestly, one of the coaches on this current staff told me last week when we were talking about this, he said, if they do this, they need to clean house. And not because any of these guys are bad in any way. He just said it is tough to blend coaching staffs together and blend, ideologies together. And you don't want people looking over their shoulder. And so he kind of felt like if they do this, they need to mostly bring in new people. Now, I think the pitching side has done a really nice job the last couple of years and did a really nice job this year. And we talk a lot about the bullpen. They also held that group together in August, basically until the last 2 weeks of the season, when it was like, here's Matt Gage and Joey Lucchesi and Yoel Peguero. So I think those guys did a nice job, and I would think they would probably be back. But in general, I think we're going to see a lot of changes. And Buster said he told those guys, there's going to be a lot of changes. So a lot of those guys were
Pat Burrell was under a lot of fire this year. Yeah. Pat Burrell was under a lot of fire this year because of how the offense was unable to perform for so long. But before he was in this hitting coach role, he was a special assistant and he was a scout, I believe, for a while. I would imagine he stays in the organization in some way if that role is vacated on his part. But we'll see. This is all speculation at this point. Yeah.
I think we're going to see 80-90% new faces.
Yeah.
This is going to be a wholesale. And I think behind the scenes as well. This is something you and I have maybe talked about here. This is going to be one where I think we get to the winter meetings and we get to next spring and you kind of look at the behind the scenes in a lot of departments and go like, oh, that guy's new. That girl's new. That guy, this person's gone. So this to me is going to be a pretty widespread.
All right. Well, the Giants core might be locked in for the next few years, but we're going to see a lot of new faces elsewhere, behind the scenes, in the dugout, in coaching roles. Alex and I will be here breaking it down as announcements happen, as interviews happen, as speculation happens. We've got a lot of questions from our Giants Talk listeners about logistics, about things like this, logistics about the end of the season, potential signings, potential trades. So we will get to those as the offseason progresses. As always, if you have questions, send them our way wherever you can find us on social media. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, and go buy The Franchise on paperback, written by Alex Pavlovic.
A whole chapter about hiring a manager.
You know what? You should PDF it and send it to Buster right now.
Yeah, we just kind of spent 10 minutes saying why that guy's probably not going to be the choice. But yeah, I will say, look, I'll finish with this. Brian Sabian, he didn't know Bruce Bochy really. They had an intermediary actually, like when they met in San Francisco. They had someone who kind of broke the ice for them and went around with them and helped them get to know each other. They became basically best friends and led this organization to great heights. So I do think one important thing here for Buster is going to be who's your partner in all of this going forward. And whether you want to do this for the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, who do you think can be that person who spends the next decade potentially with you? That is the goal in these hires, is find someone who can do that. They haven't done that recently. So that's important to keep in mind here as you kind of look at who can do this, who can pop in. Can someone do a year, 2 years, 3 years? No, I think you're finding someone. The only time it has worked here recently was when Brian Sabian found someone who was his partner for over a decade.
Yeah. Let's help Buster Posey find his partner. We got this, Giants fans.